So, format of the debate tonight is going to be, we're going to have 20 minutes opening speech from each speaker. There'll be no rebuttal in the second speech. Then we'll move on to a 10-minute rebuttal of each, for each, and then a lot of questions, so 30 to 45 minutes of questions. I'm going to remind the speakers that we have 2 minutes left by, I think, raising the really godly piece of paper, and that should be. For you guys? Okay, fantastic. I think we should start because we're already running late enough. So the first speaker is Deen. So if you want to go ahead.
In the name of God, most merciful, most kind, I'd like to begin by thanking the Islamic Society and also the Atheist Society for setting up this important debate, and also thank you to Andrew for accepting the debate this evening. So I'll be arguing that we do in fact need God for 3 reasons. The first is for ultimate meaning, second, ultimate purpose, thirdly, to secure a real notion and to guarantee our notions of morality. Ever since the Enlightenment movement, modern man has tried to rid himself of the God narrative. He felt constrained and restricted by God, and wanted to rid himself from the shackles of religion. I guess this is punishment for being late. Usually get someone to help me with people when I'm on the BBC. Great, thank you. So ever since the Enlightenment, modern man has tried to rid himself from God, from the shackles of religion. He felt constrained and restricted and felt that he could do better without God. He felt that God was this juvenile, delinquent stage of human development, and thought he could leave God behind. But in doing so, this had a disastrous impact on his life. And this impact was foreseen by the 19th century atheist philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who proclaimed the death of God, and with it, all meaning and value in our lives. Thus, the outcome of this endeavour, this party gone mad, was nihilism, the complete destruction of everything that is valuable in our lives. And that means something to us. And there is this resemblance, uncanny resemblance, between modern man and the Greek mythological character Icarus. Icarus, with the help of his father, wants to build wings made from wax and feathers to escape the prisons of Crete. And he was successful in doing so. But then he became deluded and arrogant of his achievements and his results. And he ignored the advice of his father, that ancient wisdom, and he flew too high, too close to the sun. And what happened? The feathers and wax disintegrated, and he fell to the mines, killing himself. Modern man, too, became arrogant and proud of his achievements, became deluded, and felt that he could go along without God. In killing God, he also killed himself. The Enlightenment project failed. Why? Because the universe has no universal story. And why so? Because there's no universal storyteller. Thus, the confidence to provide an alternative narrative is completely being shattered. That enthusiasm that we saw in the writings of the Enlightenment movement have completely been diminished. As time goes on, the advent of time and further scientific advancement, rather than having an illuminating present and a future outlook, what we find is something more dark and sinister. In the book, Pale Blue Dot, Carl Sagan, a noted atheist, concentrated the image taken 4 million miles away by the Voyager spacecraft. Listen to his words. He says, because of the reflection of sunlight, the Earth seems to be sitting in a beam of light, as if there was some special significance to this small world. But it's just an accident of geometry and optics. Our imagined self-importance, the delusion of some prevalent position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in a great and developing cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all its vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. He also says, who are we? We find that we live in an insignificant planet of 100 stars lost in a galaxy tucked away in some forgotten corner of the universe, in which there are far more galaxies than people. Stephen Hawking has described man as a chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet. Now, without God, man is this computer made from flesh that is located in a universe that is indifferent to his existence. He is reduced to a cosmic orphan, lost in a vast universe that is impersonal and doesn't care. Moreover, our ultimate fate is tied inextricably, definitely, without doubt, to the universe as a whole, which seems destined for a dismal end. The data from cosmology suggests that the universe, the final outcome of the physical universe, that it will continue to expand forever, dissolving into entropy. The better we understand scientific accounts, the more futile and meaningless everything seems. So not only do each and every one of us here part out of existence, but the entire human race will one day be destroyed. Now, in a horrific scenario such as this, how can we even conjure remotely some sense of meaning in our lives? What do we have to hold on to? Does it really matter whether you exist? Does it really matter if you existed at all? Whether you contributed to the long hours of study, the success in our jobs, our friendships, raising a family, to accumulate a fortune, the contributions to science, to feed the poor and to strive to end poverty in the world, the research in medicine, to build awe-inspiring buildings, writing a bestseller, the efforts to counter injustice in the world, the sacrifices for others, conquering lands. In a final analysis, all of this is utterly meaningless. In the end, it all comes to nothing. In the end, it all ends the same. It makes no difference. Why? Because our lives are utterly meaningless. Therefore, whatever we fill our lives with will be utterly meaningless. The atheist philosopher Bertrand Russell concludes. He says that man is a product of causes which had no provision of the end they were achieving. That his origin, his growth, his hopes, his fears, his love, his beliefs are but the outcomes of accidental co-locations of atom. That no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve the individual life beyond the grave. That all the labours of all the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast depth of the solar system. And that whole temple of man's achievements must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of the universe in ruins. All these things, if not quite beyond dispute, are yet so nearly certain that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand. Only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair, can the soul's habitation henceforth be safely built. Bertrand Russell wants us to embrace that reality, but I would argue there's nothing there to embrace. Our fate is tragically tied to the destruction of the universe. Maybe a depressing depiction of our situation, of reality. However, it is very, very consistent. Indeed, this is why the French existentialist philosopher Camus once made the statement. He said, "There is but one true serious philosophical question, and that is suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to the most important fundamental question in philosophy." Camus, when he was confronted with what we need and what the universe could offer, there was a mismatch. Confronted with the absurdity of life, he questioned whether we should carry on living at all. So it does not make a difference whether you exist or do not exist, whether you live or do not live at all. The second, do we have ultimate purpose? No, without God, we have no purpose whatsoever. There is no point to our lives. There is no goal. There is no reason. One way in which we can answer this, one source that might be reliable to provide a universal story that tries to make sense of the world, is science. But unfortunately, for the hope, however, contemporary science largely reiterates the sort of despair that Russell commended. An often noted remark by Stephen Weinberg underscores the futility of finding answers in a scientific account of the world. He says this: the more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it also seems pointless. The effort to understand the universe is one of the very few things that lifts human life a little above the level of farce, and gives it some grace of tragedy. If there is a story about the universe, finally it is one of tragedy. Contemporary naturalistics scientists see our emergence as due to chance, extraordinary results of accidental concurrence of a number of factors. Without God, the universe is one big cosmic accident. But wait, where does that leave us? If the universe is an accident, how do we fit in? Where do we get placed in all this? Well, listen to what Stephen Jay Gould says, the paleontologist from Harvard. He says, who is a confessed anti-theist, listen to what he says. We are here because one old group of fish had a peculiar fin anatomy that could transform into extraterrestrial creatures. Because comets struck the Earth and wiped out dinosaurs, thereby giving mammals a chance not otherwise available. So thank your lucky stars in a literal sense, because the Earth never froze entirely during an ice age, because a small continuous species arising in Africa a quarter of a million years ago has managed so far to survive by hook and by crook. We yearn for a higher answer, but none exists. So man is nothing more than a freak, an accident. That's a freak of nature, that's all that we can be. The very same blind process that has coughed up amoebas and rats has also coughed up human beings. There's nothing special about human beings. All that man is, and only can be, is a little bit of matter, atoms, chance, and some probability. Qualitatively, you have as much purpose as a rat's life. Now, it's safe to say that, in fact, bacteria have more of a purpose than you do, because they help with the sustaining of the environment. So man has no reason, he has no purpose, he has no goal. Lastly, without God, we cannot sufficiently rescue our notions of morality. We cannot guarantee our notions of morality. Now, in order for morality to have any kind of significance or any meaning, it must be objective. Because if we do not have that objective realm, then we cannot praise or blame individuals, because we must appeal to this objectivity in order to do so. So the claim, for example, the proposition, if you like, that it is objectively evil to torture a child for fun is true, objectively true. Even if, for example, this entire room or the entire population thought that it was good, it would have no bearing on that proposition, that fact. It would still be evil. It is equivalent to saying 1 plus 1 is 2. Even if everybody in the world thought that 1 plus 1 was 4, it would have no bearing on 1 plus 1 equals 2. In the same way, we have an objective sense of morality. Now, what typically follows from atheism is naturalism, where we have a closed system, a spatio-temporal system, which we can understand what exists and what does not exist by using our physicalist terms, like chemistry, biology, and physics, if you like. But the problem here is this, that morality, such things as good and evil, do not have those naturalistic properties. They do not have shape, a size, a structure. They're not made from particles, atoms, none of those things. So then how do we find morality if all that we have is physicalist terms? You cannot find morality in a test tube. Science is amoral. The late J.O. Mackie, the prominent atheist philosopher of the previous century, has confessed that moral properties constitute so odd a cluster of qualities and relations that they are most unlikely not to have arisen in the ordinary course of events without an all-powerful God to create them. This is an atheist philosopher, the late J.O. Mackie. Now, what's Mackie saying here? He's saying this. He's saying, look, if you're saying that all that we have is a physical world and we can understand physical terms to understand what exists, and then you start talking about good and evil, well, that's going to be very, very difficult to explain. Why? If we trace back the history of the cosmos, 13.5 billion years old, and we have, for example, the beginning where the universe just popped into existence, not that I believe that, but for argument's sake. And then what we have is the development of matter, particles, and they form galaxies. And then what we have is the development of planets, let's say. And one planet has the necessary and sufficient conditions to sustain intelligent life. Now, if we wanted to explain the development of hydrogen or nitrogen, that would be very easy to explain given this creation story. We can just deconstruct those elements, find out their structures and their structures and so forth. We can trace that back. We can explain that very, very easily. But when we start talking about good and evil, virtue, mercy, compassion, how do we do that? That becomes very ad hoc. The majority of the history of the universe can be described by what is the case. And then when we start talking about human beings, we start talking about what ought to be the case. So, for the last 5% of the history of Earth, development of the universe, we have these Homo sapiens being evolving. And suddenly, with their arrival, bang, we start talking about good and evil. See, according to Mackie, that does not make sense. It's very, very ad hoc. And incidentally, what he said that he concluded that objective morality must not exist. You can see that God exists. So that becomes, so the gist of that is this, is that if we start with there is, we cannot derive an ought. If you only have an is, a description of reality, you can only have a description of reality. You cannot start talking about good and evil, which is basically what ought to be the case. Moreover, if God does not exist, then what is man, as we described earlier, is an accident, right? It's an accident of this evolutionary blind process. Well, that makes him nothing more than an animal. Maybe an advanced primate. Maybe he can do lots of things like use an iPhone. But he's still an animal at the end of the day. But animals are not moral agents, my friends, brothers and sisters. When we see an eagle steal a piece of fish from the claws of another eagle, do we accuse the eagle of stealing? No, we don't. When the cat raids the cupboard and starts eating the cookies, we don't say, naughty cat, that's really immoral. We don't say these sort of things. Because these sort of things don't work in the animal kingdom, so then why would they necessarily work in human relations? Massimo Bellucci, a biologist, writes, what we call homicide, rape, or even infanticide is very common amongst different types of animals. Lions, for example, commit infanticide on a regular basis. Morality is the invention of human beings. There is no such thing as objective morality. If man is relegated to the animal kingdom and is stripped of that dignity, then there is nothing special about him. Absolutely nothing special at all. So, I'd like to conclude that we do in fact need God for three reasons: objective meaning, objective purpose, and to secure our notions of morality. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Archalo. Now we have 20 minutes from Copson. Okay,
Okay, do we need God? It's a strange sort of question which seems to favour the assumption that God is a possibility in existence anyway, which is something that I certainly don't really agree with. I'd be more happy to some extent arguing about whether there's any evidence that there is any such thing as a God in the first place, which I don't think there is. But if we have to talk about whether or not we need God, which is difficult, I sat down and tried to think of reasons for which God had been provided as an answer, typically in the last few thousand years of what we know about human beings making this sort of stuff up. And the three broad categories of needs for God that I came to, two of which were rather similar to Adam's. The first he didn't mention, but I will, because it is what I prepared. So possible needs that the idea of a God might meet. Well, the first, and I think this is very prominent in the history of gods that human beings have created, the first possible need that God could fulfill would be to explain something, some phenomenon, some situation that couldn't otherwise be explained. So God could be a hypothesis to explain the cause or nature of something when other explanations were either not available or out of reach or couldn't be conceived of. Second sort of need that God, or gods, the idea of them, might meet would be to guarantee morality. So here I come on to the same territory that Adam has carved out for us. You know, you could say, how can we provide some sort of reason, some motivation, some sort of guarantor of what is right, wrong, good and bad, how we should and shouldn't behave to other people, some foundation for morality, or we must fix it on some sort of transcendent, ultimate, external arbiter or source, because there was any other possibility. So that's another possible explanation of a need that God might meet. And the third possibility that I came up with at any rate was to give life and the universe, both those things, some sort of meaning, some sort of sense of meaning. So again, although we're not coming to the rebuttal of each other until the next round of speaking, I'll actually touch on two of the areas that Adam set out for you here. God as an explanation, I think, by the way, that we don't need God for any of those three things. God as an explanation. Well, although Adam didn't touch on this, I think this is the most common ways that ideas of God have come into existence. One of the earliest prayers, I think it's the earliest prayer that exists in writing in Europe, says, "Zeus, fall down on my fields so that my crops will grow." What's interesting about that earliest, I think it would be something like, I suppose, just over 3,000 years old, so older certainly than the bigger monotheistic religions that now exist in the world, is that it says, not Zeus, send rain down onto my fields so that crops might grow, but Zeus, fall down onto my fields so that crops may grow. God, the God, Zeus is a god by the way, as you didn't know, God is a personification of a phenomenon that is otherwise inexplicable. Now, of course, we know that rain is not a conscious entity that can be appealed to fall down on our crops and make them grow. It's a product of condensation within the closed system of the Earth. And that's interesting, this example, because it illustrates for us an important truth about gods. Now we know that about rain, we know that rain isn't a god. But we can imagine and we can see why it might have been a possibly plausible explanation. In the human world, effects have causes, actions have intentions behind them, and the association between those two things, cause and effect, act and intention, is locked into our minds. So it makes sense that people, in the absence of other explanations, would try to find human-like descriptions for the reality that they had around them, especially the more inexplicable, more threatening aspects of that reality, like the weather, like earthquakes, like thunder and lightning, and so on and so forth. We try to personalise the world so it makes sense. Why does the sun rise? Because the heavenly dung beetle rolls it across the sky if you're an Egyptian. Why is there a rainbow? Because a magical being called Iris who trails her skirts across the sky, if you're a believer in the Greek pantheon, or because God says it is a guarantee of his beneficence on you in the future, if you're Jewish or Christian. How did the earth come to be? Someone made it, just like man makes a vase or a hut or all the other things that he is capable of creating. Why do we have feelings of goodwill towards other human beings and other creatures? Because someone put them in us, in the same way that we create a character in a poem or a hero in a story. So gods arise in many situations as answers to a perceived need for explanations of how things are. When human beings have known little, at times when the scientific method of investigation and experimentation has not been fully developed or fully understood, many people have thought that the best way to explain things is through the invention of a figure like ourselves, but of course more powerful, who causes these things. But as we understand more about the world or about ourselves and our own psychology, we find better explanations. More compelling, more complete, more plausible explanations for how species arise and are differentiated from each other on Earth, for example, for why we have feelings of empathy and goodwill towards each other. So we don't need gods as explanations for how things are, for why reality is as it is and the universe is as it is. There are better explanations. I'll come on to the moral argument. Some people say that God is needed as a guarantee of morality. Well, we'll note just in passing the fact that there is very little evidence to suggest that people who believe in gods behave in any more moral way, either in this society or around the world, than those who do not. Not only is that reflected in things like religious statistics on prison admissions, it's also reflected in things like the citizenship survey that monitors how likely people are to volunteer in their local communities, do stuff for charity or whatever, which finds that religiosity is a negligible factor. People who don't believe in God are just as likely to do various sorts of charitable work and have various pro-social views as people who do. Let's leave that on one side, but note it as a persuasive argument on my side of this question. The problem, really, with this claim that God is needed to guarantee morality is the claim that objective moral values exist. And actually, Adam has claimed this to some extent this evening. Now, of course, morality is not subjective in the sense that it is something that every individual person makes up arbitrarily for their individual self, something that is grounded solely in the individual human being. Of course, morality isn't subjective in that sense, but that doesn't mean that it must come from a source outside of human beings collectively. Morality is something that is rooted in the human condition. It's grounded in what it is to be human. The fact that we are social beings, that we have certain objective basic needs, in fact, in reality, which we share, which are a part of our nature. That's the ground from which morality is built. That gives it what objectivity it has. And we need to distinguish between the idea that morality is objective in that sense, objective in the sense of being independent of the thoughts and wishes of individual human beings, particular individuals, from the idea that morality has to emanate from and be backed by some external sort of authority. Some sort of authority figure who can give you tablets of stone or offer you rewards or punishment in some other world as a fear of favour-driven reason to do good and avoid bad. And one of the good reasons why we can reject that idea is that if you do tie morality to some sort of third party, contract it out to a god, that of course makes morality not objective but subjective, because it depends on what that authority wants you to do. if that authority, for example, were to have a change of heart and decide 1 minute that it was very bad to kill children, but the next minute that it was perfectly fine to allow the massacre of innocents for some higher purpose, you would be constrained at the whim of whatever authority you decided your morality should or does emanate from. And how we decide what's right and wrong would then depend on some interpretation of this or that sacred text, or what we thought the will of this or that particular objective source out there in the universe might be. And that's why many attempts to ground morality in some hypothetical objective deity have given rise to such changeable moral codes over time. There are very few people of one particular religion today who believe precisely the same things about morality that their co-religionists of 1,000 years ago believed. And that's precisely because any sort of source, objective source that you tie morality to, is capable of interpretation, is changeable, makes your values subjective over time rather than objective at all. So since all that's the case, we can begin to look at morality in naturalistic terms. And when we do, we find that morality is something that arises naturally among human beings when they live together in communities, that it has its basis in our sense of empathy, in our social instincts, in our needs as social beings, which are part of our biological nature, augmented obviously by our conscious effort in the time that we've been conscious as human beings, and built on by millennia of culture. And we can see echoes of its biological origin in our nearest relatives and in the rest of the animal kingdom. Chimpanzees, for example, which exhibit all sorts of behaviour, which if we saw it exhibited in human beings, in conscious minds, we would call morality, but which is still the common basis of our values. And the moral journey of individual human beings is a long, hard slog. It can be very difficult to know what the right thing to do is, and it's even more difficult to actually do it, as I'm sure we've all experienced. The moral journey of humanity as a species is equally tough. It's taken enormous effort to get from the idea that you should treat your neighbour well to the beginnings of a sense of international or global justice. The idea that moral values are just something that we can read off from a cosmic recipe or rely on some contracted out third party to provide us is demeaning to the achievement of humanity over this time and that struggle. And in answer to the question how we can find the resources without an idea of God to condemn harmful actions like rape and murder, the very fact that they are violations of the necessities for our peaceful life in society together is enough. They're about, those two particular examples, are about our survival and our reproduction, the fundamentals of our lives. Rape and murder and those other things which we're asked to believe were judged wrong if we didn't have an idea of God to stamp them with wrongness, are fundamental threats to both ourselves as individuals and to the societies in which we live. They fill the life we have now, if we're the victims of those things, with horror. And that's all they need to be considered as maximum evils in this human world. We don't need anyone else out there to tell us that they are not very nice, or that they are wrong, or that charity is good. We're perfectly capable of understanding that for ourselves. So we don't need God for morality, and in fact, he has a tendency to quite often get in the way of moral behaviour. The last point, this idea that we need God to give life meaning. Well, again, the answer to this, rather like the answer to the point about morality, is partly to observe the millions and billions of people who seem to have perfectly fulfilling and enjoyable and meaningful lives in the absence of any belief in God. And for them, there seems to be no need for God in this area, and so I don't think we can sustain the proposition that there is a need generally. But the claim that God is necessary to give things meaning usually splits down in two ways that are slightly more sophisticated than that. One, it has to do with the denial that in a universe that will end, and in a human world that is finite, there can be any meaning. So the implication behind that is that infinity is a necessity, and life must be eternal in order for there to be meaning or purpose. Well, I think the claim that life must go on and be eternal and have a greater length than what we perceive as having now is very strange. And I think you can apply the same question about what meaning there can be to the notion of infinite existence. What meaning could there be in our lives if we went on forever? People may very well fear death, but in fact, it's death, the fact of death, that gives any structure to our lives at all. The moment between birth and death is our lives. It's what gives that story of our lives shape, a beginning and an end. And without shape, without a beginning and an end, I don't think there can be any meaning either. Without death, but with eternal life, what would motivate us to do anything in the here and now? Why should we help anyone today when we could help tomorrow? Right? Why would we see any point in seeking any particular achievements in the here and now or caring about other people if really we're just going to go on and on and on and on? Which, by the way, is a very tedious idea. What sense could we make of the things that we value? Love, experiences in our lives, communication, achievements, the warmth of other people, or the warmth of the sun on our faces, we experience it at last as spring begins. If we were disembodied, continuous, unending beings, what sort of experience, what sort of meaning would actually be possible? Although we all probably prefer to live a bit longer than in fact we will, I think we should also consider the horror and meaninglessness of the inconceivable tedium of going on forever. I really like chocolate cake, but the idea of doing nothing but eating chocolate cake forever, on and 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 on, and never, having any break, takes the meaning of my chocolate cake away, because the enjoyment of it lies to a large part in its finitude, in the fact that it will be over, in the fact that it is an experience, time-bound and earth-bound, that gives meaning to itself. So, I don't think the idea that we'll go on and on and on, and that infinity is necessary for meaning, is at all sustainable, and therefore certainly we don't need God for it. But the second way that the claim that God is necessary, an idea of God is necessary for a sense of meaning, has it that not necessarily that we need to go on forever in order to have meaning, but if there is no objective source of meaning out there, again for us to discover and read off, there can be no meaning for us here. Well, here rather with morality, where you find that the meaning of the word morality can turn out to be quite different for someone who takes a non-theistic approach to the question than the meaning of the word morality for someone who takes a theistic approach to the question, same word, different ideas. Then I think also the word meaning, the concept of meaning, is different as between a theistic and a non-theistic understanding. For humanists, for any people who don't believe in God, meaning is not something that exists out there in the universe, that's written into the way things are, or is waiting to be discovered, like the goal at the end of some Indiana Jones type crusade, where finally you've been through all these troubles and you go into the cave and there it is at last, the meaning that has always been there, waiting to be found. Meaning doesn't come from some external or pre-existing source in that way, for someone who talks about meaning in a non-religious sense. Meaning is something not waiting to be discovered, but something that we make, we create, through our endeavours in the here and now. The way we choose to live our lives, the story we make of our lives in our own head, our relationships with other people, with the texture and the narrative that we give to our existence in this earth for the short time that we are in it. Now, some people, to achieve that meaning, to achieve that sense of meaning in the very short life they have, find it by creating gods and ideas of gods, and thinking that this somehow gives meaning to them. And for them, it may very well satisfy that yearning. Those people who find meaning in ideas of gods may very well get it, but others don't. And the blank proposition that we need gods for this or any other reasons is quite false. Thanks very much.
In the name of God, most merciful, most kind. Thank you, Andrew, for the opening speech. What I'd like to do now is review my 3 points that I've put in my opening speech and respond to some of the points that Andrew made. So I argue that we need God for ultimate meaning, purpose, and to secure morality. So let's first address the morality issue here. Andrew said that if we do rely on God, then that actually makes it subjective, right? Because it's not us, it's God. But this confuses relative with subjective. Morality is not some kind of idea in the head. It's a relational property, and our meaning and purpose is the relational property in the nature of God. So it's not subjective in the way that Andrew was discussing. It's to do with the relation, like for example, the relation between the distance between myself and this microphone is relative, but it's not subjective. There is an actual sense of objectivity there. It's not subjective, it's objective, but it's relative. He also said that there's just the point about being moral. Actually, this doesn't translate in religious people being more moral. Now, my argument is not about how people behave; it's the basis of morality. But having said that, it's actually not true. There are studies, for example, if you read the sociology of religion, that state actually that religious people are more charitable. And the more that you go to church or the synagogue or the mosque actually translates into, I don't know why, but people actually are more charitable and giving and more compassionate in that sense. So in actual fact, that's not true. I would disagree. I think from studies dictate that actually religious people are and tend to be more compassionate and more charitable. But let's move on to the arguments about morality. And typically what happens, typically humanists argue, and as humanists they ground morality in human beings. But Andrew has just asserted that. Why should we ground morality in human beings? Where's the argument? On what basis? Remember, Andrew argues that and believes that the only game in town is Darwinism. We're just a product of this blind process. And to attribute morality just to human being commits the fallacy of speciesism, an unjustifiable bias towards one species. Remember, the same process has coughed out amoebas and rats, has also coughed out human beings. There's no justification there. Those ideas of humans being equal worth and have human value above all other creatures is something that we cherish in our society. Exactly. But my point is, why, if God does not exist? Why is that the case? See, theism provides us a sufficient grounding of that. From the theistic worldview, humans have equal and unique value in the light of the metaphysical grounding in God's creation. But if the only game in town is Darwinism, then that's going to be quite improbable and implausible. For example, Ernest Mayr, a leading biologist, evolutionary biologist, writes this: the concepts of unchanging essence and of complete discontinuities between every type and all others make genuine evolutionary thinking impossible. I agree with the claim that the existentialist philosophers of Aristotle and Plato are incompatible with the evolutionary thinking. So it's very difficult to argue some kind of specialness about human beings, some kind of moral value about humans, and to ground morality in human beings without establishing it or grounding it to begin with. Now, he also said that we can see morality, for example, in the animal kingdom. It comes in the form of, he was alluding to the point of altruism, let's say. And you can see chimpanzees exhibiting those kind of characteristics. Now, what this means, I think is maybe a tacit assertion here, that morality isn't actually true. I think Andrew is actually agreeing that it's not actually objective, but it does serve us to act in a certain way. I mean, that's the kind of feeling I got. I didn't really get too much of an argument to argue for morality. What I got was he argued against my position of being objective, grounded in God, but I didn't really see an argument grounding it in human beings beyond an assertion. But let's just say that, yes, altruism can provide us some kind of system, if you like. But what that does, that makes ethics, as we know it to be, in the way that Andrew is explaining, to be just an illusion fobbed off by our genes so that we can cooperate. That's what happens. Now, evolution can give rise to this behaviour, but it can't justify it. But has he been successful in showing us that, even by appealing to altruism, let's say? No, because even if we do that and appeal to altruism and the behaviour of human beings in our interest, that still does not explain morality. Why? Because the most that can explain is something called low altruism, or basic altruism, which is reciprocal. The forms are like this: I'll scratch your back if you scratch my back. I'll continue scratching your back if you continue to scratch my back. That sort of thing. And what that does is it reduces morality to this kind of general sense of a strategy to employ long-term benefit. But I think that really robs morality from what it really is. I think that's an egregious idea, to only be good in order to get something in return. And that goes against that kind of idea goes against our intuitions of morality, right? We have high altruism in our lives. We see it, we exhibit it. For example, when I see an old lady on the train, and I give my seat, I don't give my seat thinking one day I'll bump into her, she'll give me her seat, right? I don't do that, right? Or one day I'll bump into her and I'll ask her to borrow some money. We don't do that. We do it because it's the right thing to do, right? It's being good. So I don't see how if we don't have God, all we have is Darwinian theory. I don't see how that can explain morality, even if you don't appeal to something objective and you ground it in human beings. And that's why Richard Dawkins concedes that the Darwinian thesis cannot explain why people give blood, because giving blood is to strangers. And he calls us pure, disinterested altruism that confers no benefit to genes whatsoever. Darwinism can't explain these kind of characteristics that we exhibit as human beings. How would Darwinism, for example, explain the Muslim tradition from our Prophet, peace be upon him, when he said, when he captured the enemies and prisoners of war? I mean, these people are trying to kill you, right? And what's king in evolution? To survive, right? The Prophet, peace be upon him, said that if you eat one morsel of food, give one morsel of food to your prisoner of war. Even there are traditions that state that he gave preference to those people. So how does morality, let's say, Darwinian thesis explain those kind of acts of kindness? Or what about how does the Darwinian theory explain, or the hypothesis or analysis explain, give me liberty or give me death? You're going to die for an idea? How does that work? The ultimate purpose is to survive. I can say a bit more about that, but what I want to also talk about the meaning. Now, to end, I think what I would say here is, just, I don't have much time, but Andrew said that we can create meaning. His argument is we don't need something out there, we can just create meaning. I just find that quite difficult to grasp. What that is, what Andrew's advocating here is this type of state of happy fantasist. And our lives are based on mere illusions, blissful life on illusions. It's like someone thinking he's Napoleon or something like that, or Lord Lucan. You would say to that person, "You're not that. You need to stop being silly." As human beings, as rational, intelligent human beings, we're not just interested in what works, right? We're interested in something that is true. It's not just the case of it works. We want to know if it's based on something that is true. So let me give you the following analogy. Suppose we have a character called Wally. And Wally was a very bad student in physics. He went to the top university in physics, and he failed all of his classes. His professors and students wanted to play a trick on him. They wanted to make him believe erroneously that he was the best physics student. They would marvel at the profundity of his questions in the classroom, the complexities of his questions. How long do I have?
0 minutes.
Yeah, I was getting to the punchline. I'm allowed to finish it. Is Andrew right?
Well, I want to know how it ends.
Oh, okay, good, excellent. So what we have, they continue to play this joke on him, and he enters all of his exams, and in actual fact he deserves a 0, an F, and he passes everything with 4 colours, 100%. He graduates, he finishes his PhD, and they send a letter to all the universities and all the professors to say, look, this is a joke. Watch out for this. So he goes to different universities and starts presenting papers, and presents papers, and they are marvelled at what he achieves. Then they think to themselves, this joke's gone on too long. This joke's gone on too long, let's put him out of his misery. And they say to Willie, by the way, it's all a joke. And he starts to cry. He's very upset, distraught. And he starts to feel really guilty. And what they say is, okay, to make up for this joke gone too far, we'll say this. Wally, what we'll do is that we'll offer you to carry on like we did before. To treat you in the same way when you had respect, expertise, happiness. And Wally agrees. He says, okay, fine, let's do it. Now tell me, who would agree with that? No one would agree with that. Because his well-being is based on a false premise. In the same way, creating meaning for yourself is based on a false premise. And no one would want to do that. And that's why you still need meaning in your life. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening.
Well, because of this format, I've been asked now to respond to the things that Adam said first, rather than things that he said just now. But I will quickly point out the flaw in his critique of what I said about meaning. Now, I'm not saying that the creation of meaning and a sense of purpose in our lives should be done by us as an enterprise that we should engage in under the illusion that that meaning that we create is really the ultimate meaning in the universe. I'm not saying that at all. That would be the implication of Adam's critique, what I'm saying. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there is no meaning or purpose to the universe in the sense that Adam suggests there is. That the universe has no discernible end point, destination or trajectory, that sort of meaning is impossible, and that a sense of meaning that we can create is, and we do create, is something that we make for ourselves. But that meaning isn't a substitute for the universe having an ultimate meaning. It's just a different idea of what meaning is. And on the point about studies that show people who believe in God being more pro-social or philanthropic, in fact, that's even the studies that Adam mentioned don't show that people who believe in God do those things. It shows that people who go to certain community institutions and participate, whether they believe or not, actually generate more pro-social actions. And the only studies that I'm aware of that show that is true are actually in the United States of America, in the UK, in both the Citizenship Survey and the NCBO report, and all the research that I've ever seen over the 6 years of synthesising and reviewing it has suggested quite the opposite. However, no doubt studies show one thing and then they show another. That's what sociology is like. I apologise to any sociologists in the room. Coming back to a response to some of the things that Adam said initially, I wanted to pick out in particular, I found a lot of what he said was couched in language to make it appear that my views were going to be very unsatisfactory. He said a lot of things like, if we are just an accident, if it's only a result of chance, and so on, as if those things were necessarily inferior to the alternatives. Well, a lot of babies are accidents. Right? A lot of you, I certainly was, may well be accidents in the sense that we were not planned or deliberately created. But I don't think that simple fact means that either our parents' value is any less, or that we have any less value objectively, in the sense of that word meaning, but meaning that the values that we create objectively, rather than some third-party subjective interpretation. Accidents, well, they happen, and their consequences are not always inferior to what might be planned. I want to start with the disastrous impact that the Enlightenment has had on the world. I'm sure you all agree that you'd rather live in the Middle Ages. There is a wonderful poem by Stevie Smith. Those who are always praising the past, and especially the time of faith as best, ought to go and live in the Middle Ages and be burnt at the stake as witches and sages. Well, we don't burn them at the stake anymore. Since the Enlightenment, you may argue we found other more sophisticated ways of making their lives unpleasant. Perhaps that's true, but I think it would be foolish to deny that the Enlightenment has had a disastrous impact, and that in killing God we have killed ourselves. That it's the complete destruction of everything valuable in our lives. I don't recognise that as a description of Sweden or Norway or any of those societies that these days the non-religious, the non-believing outnumber the religious to a large extent. Those societies are in fact some of the most equal, some of the most civilised, some of the most just, some of the most socially progressive, some of the least criminal, the lowest murder rates and the highest rates of self-confidence, happiness and social security in the world. Now, I don't say that necessarily there's a causal link between the fact that also they're extremely secular, but I suspect there might be. And I certainly think that it offers good counter-evidence to the idea that the Enlightenment values that those societies embody are somehow destructive of human welfare. There are a few things that are a lot more widespread in the world today as a result of the Enlightenment than they were before it. Democracy. The rule of law as an established system under which everyone is equal without gradations. Scientific progress, human rights, an attempted human rights at least. An attempted international justice in a way that will be impartial for the first time. And I say this an attempt because obviously it hasn't been achieved. Social democracy, like in those Scandinavian social democracies that I talked about at the beginning. I think if that is human suicide, then it's a pretty good afterlife. The Enlightenment is meant to have killed us at the same time as we killed God. So the first thing I want to say is I completely get this idea that the Enlightenment has had a disastrous impact on our lives, and I don't think anyone in this room in practice would like to go, rather go and live in some pre-Enlightenment society and be alive today with all the choices and the options and the opportunities. Well, half of you would be dead anyway, because the sort of conditions for that you were born under or the diseases that you had as children would have killed you anyway by now. If so would have killed me, I'm sure it would have killed them. And I don't think that in reality anyone would want to travel back in time and swap their life today for that. You live a life today that any Roman emperor would envy. I come on to responding to this point about Carl Sagan when he looks at the pale blue dot that the Earth is, when he takes a cosmic step back and sees those first satellite pictures of our planet, the only world we'll ever know, in all likelihood. And writes so poetically about it as both a scientist and a humanist. Adam quoted those words of Carl Sagan's that no help will come from outside this earth for us. And he derided the idea, or shivered in response to the idea, that a proper view of the universe may indicate to us that our planet is peripheral to the universe. We're not the centre of it, unfortunately, though we'd like to be, and we're right to the centre of everything all the time, no doubt. But we can't be. And just as we can't be as individuals, our planet is also not at the centre of the universe, it is peripheral to the universe. It is true that no help will come from outside it. And this is very depressing, sadly, and to those who think that God is necessary to answer these questions. But why not say, well then, if no help will come from outside, all the more important that we should help each other. All the more important that we should have human solidarity, that we should help each other in the here and now. If there's no justice to come, let's try for justice today. If there's no continued existence where individuals can reach their true season, their true realisation, their true personal development, their true fulfilment, then let's make it as likely as we can, as possible as we can, for those things to happen today. Let's make every life as it's lived, the only life that each individual will have, as good as possible. because that's the only way that completeness, that fulfillment will ever come. There is no help from outside, but that makes the duty on us to help each other all the more defensible. And to the universe, we are peripheral, that's true, but that doesn't mean that we're peripheral to ourselves or to each other. I come back to the idea that meaning, that values, must be grounded in our humanity, in what we are to each other. As I mentioned Darwinism repeatedly, I don't think I mentioned it once, and he said that no moral system could be built on it. Well, of course not. It's an explanation for how species emerge and are differentiated. It's an explanation for the evolution and changing nature of life on this planet. It's not something intended to give a moral theory. Why would it provide any moral theory? I didn't claim it would, and I don't say that it does. What I say is not science, but human beings, our own empathy, our own reason, our own morality, what we call morality now we're conscious beings, but the thing that does have its basis in our natural, in biology, in our own nature, even though it's been built and cultivated by our own endeavours over the millennia. Morality, let's think of an analogy to make it clear what the difference is. Morality is not something like the moon. That if every human being on the world was to die tomorrow, or later today, or whenever, there would be no morality, no such thing. In the way that there would still be the moon, or the sun, or all the other things that objectively exist out there in the universe. Morality is not something like that. It's something more like love. If every human being in the world died tomorrow, although the moon is still there, love will never be known again. Love is something that is to do with human beings. It arises from our interactions with each other. It has its basis in biology, but it's something more than that, because we've made it more than that through the application of our conscious minds and effort for a systemised attempt to identify good things and develop them and enjoy them and describe them and make them more than what they used to be. And morality is like that. It's an extremely great achievement of human beings. It's got nothing to do with Darwinism, and it's got nothing to do with God either. Thanks very much.
Just a comment, since you mentioned the Nazis and the Holocaust, I have the care to both of you. Just a comment, and then I have a question about morality and purpose as well. At the end. It's just very quickly. In Mein Kampf, Hitler wrote, "If I'm killing Jews, I'm doing a service to the Lord Almighty." And that is very important to remember, because the Nazis were not atheists. They were Christians. They were God believers in their own way, but they were not atheists. And that's a very important thing to state. He was doing the service to the God Almighty by killing Jews. And he wrote that in my camp. That's a comment. The other thing about accidental presence of humans here is not one of the Darwin reasons. We are the product of massive extinctions to the 90% level, and that's purely by accident. Without the last one, we wouldn't be here. Without the last one, the dinosaurs would be here. The tree of life would still be here. We are a mere accident. The question is, and this is related to what we were talking about just now, in which way does the believing God give us morality and purpose that we cannot get elsewhere? I want specific examples, please.
Right. In my opening speech, I argued that without God we have no morality, no real sense of morality. If God does exist, then we have an objective grounding and transcendence that we can appeal to. I think even Andrew can agree that that would be true. It would be transcendent. And so that means that we have a... No? No. Okay. Well, it is. It would be transcendent if it was grounded. Whether you think it's great or not, but it would be transcendent. And then what that does is, as soon as that's a reality, then we have what we apprehend to be justice, compassion, generosity, transcends the socio-cultural environment that we live in. Once you ground it in human beings, you lose that objectivity. Okay? And I think what we've heard today so far, that I think most atheists agree that if morality is not objective, if it's not grounded in God, then it's not real in the sense that I'm talking about. Right? So let's agree there. Your point about Hitler, by the way, well, he was just wrong. That's it. That's the end bottom line. Because God would not sanction the genocide of 6 million Jews. And maybe Hitler was appealing to God because he was a bit Machiavellian and he wanted some allies on his side. I mean, we can give many answers. My point this evening is not a religious one. I'm not arguing as a Muslim necessarily to say that we need God for morality. I'm not arguing objectively. Even if many people and many atheists concur that if God doesn't exist, like J.L. Mackey from Oxford University, he concedes that there is no objective morality. So we're agreeing here, but we're not acknowledging the impact of not having objective morality.
It's questions, not discussions. We won't be able to I'd love to have more conversations with everyone. Yes, one of you, both pointing yourselves. I believe this gentleman on the right, he has certainly must have an arm that's hurting more. Yes. Who's your question for?
I'm a research scientist, and during my years studying science and research science, not once have I found morals in proteins, love in cytoplasm, hate in pedagogy, that's actually
there's a lot of things we know there.
So, nothing in biology, there's morals in human nature. Now, for you to say that it's part of human nature would mean that there should be a consensus on what is right and wrong. To say no, never. Well, if you're saying no, okay, let me just make a point. There should be a consensus that there's a right one with all humans. Well, as we can see, there's always changes from time to time, places to places, situation where we're good, we're happy in terms of in our moods, we're happy or sad. We will change our rights and wrongs. But if you just come back to it, if you're saying no, so we will come back to it.
Right, so well, of course it's not very surprising that you won't find love or hate or war or poetry or morality in the sort of life forms that you're talking about. Those are very much human concepts. But in the same way as war is a human concept, but violence is an instinct that other animals also have, and in the way that this gentleman, who with respect studies other mammals and their behaviour, where he does find the same sort of behaviours that human beings in a more unconscious possibly form, I think that speaks to support the claim that I'm making, which is that morality has at its basis, at its foundation, social impulses. Now, of course, it doesn't begin and end with social impulses, so you're quite right to say that just because morality has an internal to human beings' natural basis, rather than an external to humanity supernatural basis, right? Just because that's the case and that's true, doesn't mean that therefore all the structures that human beings consciously build on that foundation will concur across time and across place. So just because morality, what we call morality, is an organised attempt to reinforce the social impulses, doesn't mean that we're all going to share the same values. The organised attempt of reinforcing those impulses is as important as the original impulses themselves. But the original impulses do exist. And they're not the beginning and the end, and the be-all and end-all of morality, but they are its necessary foundation. And he wants to follow up on that.
I really wish you could.
And there are more things, and you could go further. You could look at something like the principle of reciprocity, the golden rule of treating, not treating other people how you wouldn't want to treat yourself. And you could say there's some good evidence in human societies across time and across the world that actually some principles are widely and almost universally shared. And so there is some evidence that would refute what you.
My question to Adam, I just want to shift to the discussion of meaning, and I'd like to request Adam that you kind of give the answer without resorting to Darwinism. The reason is that, the question is that, why can't we find, even if one doesn't believe in God, why can't we find meaning on the basis of what is? So the point is that when you look at the world, we can
you asked the question now, so
we can clearly distinguish
The question usually has a squiggly thing at the end.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Can I just take it out of the question and answer session very quickly? Please have questions from people. 10 seconds, Kate. I've got a timer.
So we can clearly distinguish between who is a human being and who is not. And human being is capable of rational thought and abstract thinking. So why can't we find significance on that basis alone, even if we do not research for God? Question mark.
Okay. I'm not saying that we can't construct meaning, but my argument here is that it would not be ultimate and it would not be objective because one is constructing the meaning. You can construct meaning all day long, but that's what it will be. Just like morality is a form of constructing what we're hearing, so would your meaning be. How would you have meaning because a terrestrial creature developed legs from fins to crawl on land? What meaning can you derive from that? I don't know what, you're going to grow up and be a great singer, a doctor. What kind of meaning can you derive from that? There's not much there. The only thing that you can get is you're here to survive. That's the most. And meaning and significance is relative to a framework. And the question here that I'm arguing is that framework real? So, for example, a goal has significance relative to a football game. And to win three trophies in a year, I'm told, I'm not much of a football fan, is quite a meaningful thing, significant, right? But in the broader framework, does it really matter that goal in the championships didn't happen to our lives? Does it really matter that football team didn't win the league that year? No, it doesn't. It's very trivial. In the same way, your life that you construct this kind of meaning would also have no bearing either in the broad framework. And the broad framework is what? That the universe is going to be destroyed. So it has no meaning whatsoever. You can construct it all day long, and I'm not denying that. I'm sure that people do that. But and the other point here is that sufficient, being intelligent people and rational people, as you said? I don't think that is. Look, isn't it ironic that the Enlightenment movement, the whole point of it was that we abandon religion because it's grounded on myth. And now we're saying, let's create, invent meaning and lie to ourselves. I just think there's an irony there. I really do think there's an irony there. And we need to see, look, the Enlightenment project, I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, although that's what the Enlightenment did. The initial project, great. Individuals were arguing against the abuse of power by the religious communities. Fine, right? But then they ended up with Nietzsche. No God, no meaning, no purpose. See, and that's the destructive nature of the Enlightenment in that sense. So, yeah, we can have meaning, we can construct it, but it doesn't make it real.
Okay, any more short questions? I think you.
Are there any religious reasons, Brandon Doyle, are there any religious reasons to act morally other than fear of hell or desire to get into heaven?
Actually, sorry. Can we give a round of applause for knowing how to form a question? The reason is that the category good actually exists. It's real. That self-sacrifice is actually a good thing. It's a virtuous thing, right? I believe in God, and I believe that morality, categories of good and evil are actual genuine things. There is an objective difference from showing love to a child and torturing a child. So the reason that I'm motivated, I'm not motivated just because of heaven. I'm not motivated because I want to escape hell. I'm motivated because it's actually real. It's actually real. The actual category of good and evil is actually real. And then when I give charity, when I do charity, I'm actually fulfilling a real duty, a virtue. Because I could well just give that money to myself, buy a burger or something. Right? What's the difference? There is a difference. When you believe in God, and that's what I'm arguing today, that there is a qualitative difference there.
You talked about animals' morality being just reciprocal altruism. I was wondering if you're familiar with the works of Beckhoff, Arsenal, who argued, obviously, I'll give just one very example of evidence. Mark Beckhoff wrote about the rescue antelopes from a cage. They actually broke down the cages and rescued antelopes. There's no evidence that that's anything to do with reciprocal altruism. There's most, I think, primatologists and animal researchers that work in this field would say animals do have morality and it's not simply reciprocal.
Is that question to me?
Yes, that's to you.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not familiar with the work. And with that example, you don't need to know about it.
Yeah, well, I think that's an anomaly. I don't think elephants go around rescuing antelopes and other creatures. I think that would be an anomaly. I think that's the first time I've heard of that. And that sounds more examples. Well, yeah, it's fascinating, but I think, for example, animals cause pain and suffering to other animals all the time. So are we going to now justify that behaviour as well? I don't think so. I think look, for example, an ant, for example, who has this inbuilt in his structure to immolate himself and burn himself in the flames to save the community of ants. He exhibits that kind of self-sacrifice because it's built in him, right? But why doesn't it? If he didn't do that, would it be wrong? Morally wrong? No. He could be going against his genetic makeup, his physical construction, his conditioning, evolutionary conditioning, but he wouldn't be immoral in any sense. So I find it very difficult when what we're doing there is we're imposing our constructs on the animal kingdom. And that's a problem. I think that's what we need to justify that morality exists, and then say, oh, that appeals that coincides with this aspect of morality, that coincides with that aspect of morality. If you haven't established it exists, then we're just seeing what we want to see.
Thank you. Is it a question for Andrew?
Thank you very much for your talks. Just one point, Kant, of course, was the greatest man in the past, and he said that.
Well, I don't think that's true.
Okay, so but he did say that God is necessary for morality to exist. And obviously then that goes through the process of other thinkers, say ultimately culminating someone like Nietzsche who says that, of course, God is dead. And he would say something like, just along the lines, I'm just trying to make the point about, almost all atheist thinkers say, the major ones like Sartre, Camus, Nietzsche, they would say that there is a connection between God and morality. Yeah. And I'm just trying to see, I just can't see when you follow that connection. I was obviously said about God, everything is permissible. Nietzsche would just say that you don't believe in yourself. You're trying to be Christians without Christ.
Right.
So I'm just trying to my point to be, how...
Do I agree with Nietzsche? No.
No, I'm asking you, how can you follow logically that you're not just creating your own mythology to justify morality?
Me?
Yeah,
well, of course, I can't say.
No, given the fact that you don't believe that there is such thing as objective truth.
I do agree that such thing as objective truth.
You do believe that there is objective
truth?
What do you mean morality?
Oh, morality.
Yeah.
Well, that question boiled down just basically translates into how can't you believe that there's objective morality that relates
so you
God?
don't believe you believe in objective truth, but not objective morality?
Well, it depends what you mean by objective truth. I mean, I believe there are true facts about the universe to be discovered which will be equally accessible to people on the same basis and justifiable to other people on that basis. But I don't agree that morality is one of those things. That comes back to my analogy, for example. Morality is not like the moon or the stars or the sun. It's something that is out there and is real in that sense. It's something like love or empathy or understanding or community, something that exists because of and is generated by human beings. That makes a different sort of thing.
Real.
So that's, sorry?
But not real in the sense like this bottom is here.
Well, it's not a bottle.
No, I mean in the sense that it is here that I can tangibly verify that that's still there.
Yes.
Morality does not exist.
Morality is not like a bottle. It's not like a bottle or the sun or the moon or the star. It's not a thing that has independent existence of human beings. It has no existence independent of human beings.
How
Yes.
does that anything about truth?
Okay. Well, what's that got to do with truth? And
Because you might say morality exists, but it doesn't exist in any objective sense.
I don't want to have to stop this because
Well, let me answer the question to you.
I really wish you could put it in one so I didn't have to do that.
Can you understand the idea that love is something that does not exist like this bottle or the moon or whatever, but exists because of the relations between people and is generated, and it's generated by human beings.
Yeah, of course, but that's not my point. My point would be that you would say calling a relativist concept, which would just lead to a form of nihilism because you have nothing to ground it in metaphysics.
But I'm grounding it in the existence of human beings,
Yeah, that's
of our shared needs, and our nature as social animals.
I think this one's going to be a really long one, so I'm going to move on. I would love to do another one, there's lots of people that have questions, so
Hi, this is to Adam. You keep talking about objectivity, and I wonder, with your idea that it's objectively more meaningful if the meaning comes from God than if the meaning is created by us, how is that objectively true? Because surely that stems from your perception of what makes meaning meaningful. For me, meaning comes from the people around me, and that is inherently more meaningful than living my life for a God could ever be. So I want to know where your objective meaning is coming from, even if it is God. Why is that better than mine?
That's a very good question. I think it's a question. So that's good. Because God is that being which no greater being can be conceived, which is the highest good. So if my life is dedicated and determined by that, that's a fulfilling life. I don't know what could be more fulfilling than that. Whereas the alternative is what? That we have no meaning, that we invent meaning, that we almost lie to ourselves, or we deceive ourselves, and illusion plays a big part in our lives. I don't know, even objectively, I mean, we're not, by the way, this evening is not about whether God exists or does not exist, it's about the impact of God. So even if God didn't exist, but if God existed, to be directed by Him, to live a life according to His purpose, and what could be greater than that? The locus of all that is true and what is moral, what could be greater than that? I don't know what could be, nothing could be greater than that.
Can man create mosquito?
What?
And if he can he give her or it a soul?
The answer is no.
who's the question for?
But maybe one day.
Doesn't matter.
We might have time for another question, so yes.
I can't hear us.
Sorry, would you believe what happened to us after death? Talking about the human race and after our existence, what do you think will happen to us?
The death of every human being, at the end of our being.
First in death, or
Things will be very quiet.
for example, anyone, and then what do you think will happen to the rest of the human race?
What do I think will happen? Well, depends how long you've got, doesn't it? I mean, if we all... What?
Nothing. Nothing happens.
Say it again.
And like, what do you believe will happen post-death?
On the individual level, I think that death is the end of personal existence. So I think that death is the end. I can't see anything in a human being that could survive the body to which the personality is tied. So I don't think that there is any existence after death for any part of the individual personality. When all human beings are ultimately dead, then it will be the same thing. Everyone will be over, finished, the end. But of course the universe will carry on, and this planet will carry on, and no doubt other forms of life will come to dominate it as they did before we existed and as they shall in the future. That's not just what I think, by the way. That's pretty much certainly what will occur. I don't know how important that is in the here and now, very unimportant. Not something you need to keep present in your mind at all times, since it's highly unlikely that anyone here, in fact it's impossible that anyone here will live to see it, barring accidents.
Okay. Thank you very much, Andrew and Owen.